So today we are going to talk about a few things. We're going to give a general overview of the agency so you kind of understand what it is that we do. We're going to talk about things that we can fund, and then we're going to talk about the different grant programs that we have available. We are a state agency that promotes, cultivates, and sustains the arts for the people of Nebraska. And that is our mission statement, and that's what we do. As Mike said, our offices are open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. We are located downtown. This is a much prettier picture than how it actually looks right now, since they're doing all of the work downtown on the mall. And it's all torn up, but we are in that white building and we're in the lower level. You'll see our phone number listed there, and then also our website. All the information we talk about today can be found on our website. There are a few grant programs we're still creating the web pages to, but for the most part, you'll be able to find it on there. We are on social media. We have a Facebook page where we have a lot of updates, a lot of things that are coming up, grant opportunities. So it's always good to like our page. We are also on Instagram, Vimeo, and YouTube. We have some nice interviews with artists on there, and also some different webinars that we've done in the past. And that's probably where this webinar will live also. So we have some tools on those different channels to help you out. Just a brief overview of our agency. We get our funding from 3 different sources. We get an appropriation from the state legislature. We also receive federal funds from the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts. And then we also have a public-private partnership with the Nebraska Cultural Endowment. We have a 15-member board, and those board members are appointed by the governor. And then we have a 10-member staff. We have a very small staff, only 10. And so the nice thing is, if you ever have questions, you can call one of us, and if we don't have the answer, we know who to send you to, and we can point you in the right direction because we work very closely together, so we know who to direct you to. We also work with additional help of panelists and other resources when we need to. So let's talk a little bit about eligibility requirements. So who can apply? You need to be either a nonprofit organization or a subdivision of government. If you're a nonprofit, you need to have your federal employer identification number, your FEIN number, and you need to have your 501c3 status, that federal tax exempt status. You do need to have a DUNS number, which is short for Dun and Bradstreet. If you don't have one, it's pretty easy to get. It takes a couple of weeks, but that's something that's fairly easy to get, and we can help walk you through that process if you don't have one. Something new this year, you are going to need what's called a UEI number from sam.gov. Now, you won't need that to set up a new account in our online grant system, so in order to submit for the spring deadline, but you will need to have it by April 8th. So that's something to be aware of. And Jennifer is going to drop some information into the chat about that UEI. And if you have questions, we'll have some information on our website and we can help walk you through that. We also allow churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, and private schools to apply, but they need to submit a copy of their sales tax exemption certificate. So what kind of things do we fund? We are looking for things that have high artistic excellence and artistic merit, and you're going to talk about that in your application. We're going to ask you about the artists involved and what it is that they're doing. We're looking for things that demonstrate creativity and innovation, that show cultural and generational diversity. And we're looking for things that foster access to the arts for underserved communities. And there's going to be very specific questions about underserved communities, and you can tell us about that in your application. We look for things that promote arts advocacy, collaboration, and education. We can also help with the cost of program accommodations for persons with disabilities, and we have a very specific grant program for that. And we'll talk about that when we get into the different grant programs. We also are able to fund fairs and festivals that feature arts and cultural activities. So for instance, if you have a multicultural festival, we have helped fund some of the powwows that happen across the state, some of those types of things. So what do we not fund? We do not fund artistic fees for students. So for example, if you wanted to do a mural in your community and you wanted to have high school students be a part of that project, you're more than welcome to have students be a part of it. But what we would suggest is hiring a professional artist to help oversee the project and help give the students guidance, show them how to do the mural, and some of that educational components. And we can help fund that professional artist that comes in. We do not fund arts projects that exclude the public. That doesn't mean that everything has to be free. You can still sell tickets to your event or your program. But what it means is if you wanted to have a concert in your backyard for 10 of your closest friends, we would not fund that. It has to be something that's open to the public. We also do not fund capital improvements, construction, or restoration. We do not fund events or projects that have already taken place. We'll talk a little bit about deadlines and when you need to submit things. And you'll see that everything is going to be in the future when you need to, when your event is. You have to apply ahead of time. We do not fund food and beverages, with the exception of travel-related costs for artists and contractors. And we also do not fund general operating expenses for non-arts organizations. We do not fund permanent supplies and equipment. I use the example that we can help you rent the piano, but we can't help you buy it because that's going to be permanent. Because we are a state agency, we do not fund political activities. We do not fund prizes, awards, or scholarships, or things that already have received NAC funding. So for instance, if you submit a project grant for a festival, you can't come back and apply for a mini grant for the same festival. And we do not fund things that are suitable for local support. Some of those examples are mascots, memorials, or school productions. And lastly, we do not fund the reduction of existing deficits. I always find these graphs really interesting. So I wanted to share them with you. This is a breakdown of the funds that were awarded by the Arts Council. And it's an average of 3 years because, of course, we've had the pandemic in there, which threw whatever normal was out the window. So we took an average of 3 years, and you'll see it broken down by congressional districts. And so you'll see District 1 is blue, 2 is pink, and 3 is green. And our goal is to try to have that as even as we can, because we want to fund across the state. You'll notice that that yellow slice of pie is for programs that are statewide. So that means that the applicant themselves may be located in Lincoln, but it's a program that went out and toured across the state, so it had statewide impact. This is a chart that shows the amount of requests that we received versus what we were able to award. And this is always, I think, important to talk about because we obviously get more requests than we are able to award. So that's something to remember as you're writing things like your project grant or your mini grant, that what you ask for, you probably won't receive 100% of the funding just because we don't have it. We don't have all the funds that we receive requests for. So I always find that really important. So now let's start talking about the different grant programs. But first, there's a few changes that you may see this year. If you are used to writing grants to us in the past, you're gonna notice a few things that are different. One is that we spent this winter going through the language of our applications and really trying to simplify our questions, trying to make questions that aren't two questions in one and separate those out so that the applications make more sense. And so it's much easier to answer the questions. You'll also want to take a look at the rubrics. If you're unfamiliar with rubrics, a rubric is what our reviewers and our panelists use to score an application. And so it's very important when you're writing your application to take a look at that rubric. And you're going to notice a few changes in them this year. For one, the look is a little different, but you're going to notice a lot more focus on community engagement. So for example, you may notice in the project grants that there used to be more points allotted for artistic quality. And now you may see more points allotted for community engagement. You're also probably going to notice a few more questions about that. How are you engaging your community in your project? How are they involved? How are you being responsive to what your community needs? So grants for organizations, we have set deadline grants and we have floating deadline grants. Set deadline grants mean they are due either March 15th or October 1st. One thing to keep in mind is our fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th. So that March 15th deadline is going to be for anything that is happening during the fiscal year of July 1st, 2022 through June 30th of 2023. So it can be anything falling within that fiscal year. That fall deadline are for things that happen during the second half of the fiscal year. So January 1st of 2023 through June 30th of 2023. We have the two deadlines because that spring deadline can be really early to submit something that's happening the following March. That can be really difficult to have all of those pieces together. So we have two deadlines. We also have floating deadline grants. And those you apply 6 or more weeks before the project start date, but it depends on the category. So you'll want to make sure that you take a look at the deadlines for each category, the one that you're interested in, so you know the deadline. And just a note, most of our grants require a dollar for dollar match. When we go through the different programs, I'll tell you if they don't, it'll usually be on the screen. But a cash match means that it has to be matched by some other sort of cash, which can be ticket sales, it can be business sponsorships, donations, it can even be applicant cash. Maybe you've set aside money in your budget for this specific project, and so you have some cash to do that with. It cannot be in kind. And in kind are things like volunteer hours or items that are donated to you for the project. Set deadline grants include arts project grants, arts learning project grants, and artists in schools and communities that have requests over $16.50 per artist. And we'll dig into these a little bit. So the arts project grants are for productions or events that are open to the general public, and it can be a wide array of things. Exhibitions, performances, poetry readings, murals. It's a wide open field, what they can be. The maximum request is $7,500 in this category. And remember, that does require that one-to-one cash match. You'll see an image here of the powwow. And so we talked about earlier, those are things that are eligible for a grant. Arts learning project grants are programs that have a strong educational emphasis. They can either be school-based, which include pre-K through 12 schools, or they can be community-based. And those are projects that take place outside of schools, or maybe they're projects that is learning for adults. If it's a school-based project, it needs to incorporate educational learning standards. And there is a very specific question about that in the application. One thing to remember is that any project that is targeting youth must apply in the Arts Learning Project Grant. Same as the regular project grant, the maximum request amount is $7,500, and it does require that one-to-one match. If you're unsure about which category, the arts learning or the arts project is the best fit for you, it's a great idea to call Anne or I and talk through that, because the questions are different. So it's not a simple matter of, oh, we'll just toggle this over to a different screen in the online grant system. It's not that easy. So if you have questions or are unsure about which one is the best fit, it's always best to give us a call or send us an email and have that discussion, and we'll talk it through. These two grant programs go in front of a review panel, and we'll talk about writing to the reviewer, to the panelists at the very end. But just know that it does go in front of a panel, and it's a very competitive process. Artists in schools and communities with requests over $16.50 per artist. This helps organizations or schools fund interactive artist residencies. There is a floating version of this also, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. This is for larger residencies. So they are probably going to have more than 30 artist sessions. The artists that are involved in these projects are artists that are on our roster. We have an artist in schools and communities roster. Sometimes we call that the teaching artist roster, and that is available on our website, and you can take a look at the artists that are involved in it, and also the different art forms that they represent. If you have questions about what artist may be the best fit for a residency, Anne is going to be your contact, and she can help walk you through that process and have that conversation. Now we're going to go into the floating deadline grants. You'll see that most of them you apply 6 weeks or more before the start date, with the exception of school buses, which are due at least 4 weeks before the start date. School buses are probably our most popular grant program, probably because everyone can picture a school bus, right? We're all familiar with that image. This program helps to cover bus costs and admission fees for field trips to professional arts events for pre-K through 12 students. So it's a great program. This is non-matching, but it is a reimbursement grant. So know if you're interested in this, you have to pay for everything up front. The award depends on the number of students served. So you'll want to take a look at that on the website and take a look at how that breaks down for your organization. There is a fairly new option this year where school districts, the district can apply on behalf of multiple schools. Sometimes that really helps them plan ahead. It helps save them time if kind of this one central entity is responsible for doing the application. And it also can help us because it helps to condense the number of applications we have to go through. We have an arts accessibility grant. There are 2 different pools in this grant program. The first one is event services. Once again, this is also non-matching, but reimbursement. So you'll have to pay for everything up front. There's a maximum for $300 per event, or if you're doing a series, it's capped at $1,500. But the different things that can help support are ASL, sign language interpreter services, audio description, and possibly transportation. It can also help with some physical things like sensory kits and Braille printing. The other pool are improvement projects. So this is a little bit bigger. For instance, if you wanted I think we had one that helped improve the curb cut to make their sidewalk more safe for handicap accessibility. It is also non-matching and reimbursement, so you have to pay for everything up front. It's a $5,000 maximum request, so a little bit bigger because we're talking about bigger projects. You do have to complete a letter of intent first before you can move on to the application process, so just be aware of that. But the different things it can support are things like purchasing equipment, for instance, a hearing loop. It can help with facility or infrastructure improvements like that curb cut that we talked about, and also professional development. Creative Aging Through the Arts is a fairly new program that we have at the Arts Council. And artists lead workshops at different locations. And the whole idea behind it is that it's serving older adults. And that is the target audience for this program. We do have a list or a roster of artists that you can see on our website. And these artists have gone through extensive training to be a part of this program. It is a non-matching grant also, and it has a maximum request of $2,860. And I know that sounds like an odd kind of amount, but once you get into the guidelines and you kind of read through it, there's a reason behind it and it makes sense, even though it looks funny on this screen. Mini grants are a smaller form, basically, of a project grant. Once again, it supports a broad spectrum of events. So once again, your performances, your poetry readings, murals, a wide array of projects. It's a $2,000 maximum request. Mini grants are nice because, for one, you may have a project that just has a much smaller budget. And so you want to do a much smaller application than a project grant. The other thing is also because they're floating and you apply at least 6 weeks ahead of time, if you don't have enough information to submit an application at that set deadline at March 15th, it's nice to know that you can wait until you're a little bit closer to the project's start date to submit a mini grant. So it allows you to be a little bit more flexible. Organizations can apply for up to 2 mini grants per fiscal year. Now, this is the floating version of the artists in schools and communities. Same idea, it helps the sponsoring organizations or the schools fund artist residencies. There's 2 types of programs involved with this. We have one that has 3 visits or 3 sessions. So maybe you want to try this program out. You're not quite sure if it's the best fit, or maybe you're having a hard time scheduling things. I know with the pandemic, it's kind of thrown whatever regular scheduling is, it's kind of thrown everything off kilter. So maybe it's something where you're like, well, I know I can commit to 3 sessions. So that would be a good fit for me. And then you can also do a larger program, a residency, which would be 10 to 30 sessions. Once again, the artists are selected from that teaching roster that we talked about earlier. It's a non-matching grant up to $1,650. If there are travel costs involved, the sponsors or whoever is hiring the artist, that the applicant, will need to cover those. The touring program is kind of the sister program to the Artists in Schools and Communities program. The way this program works is that it pays 45% of the artist fee up to $2,000. We cap it at $2,000 because there's some larger groups that are on the roster, and so they have higher artist fees. And so to be able to make our money go as far as possible, we cap it at $2,000. The whole goal of the touring program is to get artists out and across the state. And so for that reason, the artist must live at least 30 miles away from the applicant. So for instance, if you are an organization in Omaha and you want to hire an artist off our roster, you could hire them if they live in Omaha, but you wouldn't be able to apply for grant funds. You'd have to look beyond Omaha. And like the Artists in Schools and Communities, we do have a touring roster. And the thing to talk about with both rosters is that the artists go through an extensive application to be on those rosters. They have to submit budgets and work samples, and really they are showing their artistic quality to those outside panels before they can get onto the roster. So it kind of helps to save the applicant time. Another part of the touring program is the state poet, presenting the state poet. Matt Mason is the Nebraska state poet, and he loves to go out and across the state. We love for him to go out, so we help underwrite those costs. There is a budget included in the application, but what you need to know is that the presenting organization is responsible for $50. There's some math that happens and there's some budgeting that you have to go through. But basic bottom line is the presenter is responsible for $50. The applications are due at least 6 weeks before the start date. So that deadline works much the same way as the touring program. Microgrants are also fairly new to our agency. The idea behind microgrants is that it is set up to help artists or small organizations do community art projects. So if you're an organization that wants to apply for a microgrant, you need to be a first-time applicant and a small budget, so a budget below $30,000. Artists can apply multiple years, so they don't need to be a first-time applicant. But the whole idea is a community arts project. The maximum request in this category is $500. So yes, it's a small amount, but it is a small application. It's a very easy process. And like I said, the whole goal is to be kind of the Kickstarter that just gets something going. So now that we've talked about the different programs and you are all ready to go and find out more information and how do you apply? You're going to go to our website and you see up here, apply for a grant, and you're going to click on that. And then here on the left, you're going to see the different grant categories that we have. And so you can click on those and you can learn a little bit more. There's going to be eligibility requirements, deadlines, our guidelines are going to be on there. And the guidelines are really helpful because if you open those up, it's going to have the questions that we're going to ask you in the application. So you can kind of take a look at exactly what we're going to ask you before getting into that online grant system. You'll notice there are a few grant programs that aren't up there yet. They should be soon. We didn't want to add confusion before we open them in the online grant system and have them on our website. And if people saw them on the website and went, wait, I can't see them in the online grant system, and then there's lots of questions. So in a couple days, you'll see pages for the arts project, arts learning project, and the mini grant. To apply, you're going to look here at how to apply, and you're going to see right here, grant system login. You'll click on that, and that will take you directly to our online grant system. You may hear us as staff call it Foundant. You don't need to know that. That's just the name of the system. But if you hear that word, that's what it is. And this is the login page. If you already have an account, you'll just put in your email address and your password, and it takes you right in. If you've applied before, but you can't quite remember your password, just click Forgot Your Password, and it'll walk you through the steps of resetting that. If you're completely new, you'll click on Create New Account. If you're a new staff person with an organization that you're pretty sure already has an account with us, contact us. It's especially important. We're going to send you to Jennifer. So I would say just contact Jennifer, our grants and data administrator, and she'll make sure that your account gets set up under the right organization. And that way we don't have multiple accounts for the same organization going on in the system. If you want to create a new account, you'll click on that button. And this screen is going to come up. So these are the things you're going to want to have handy when you go to set up your account. Your tax ID, that DUNS number that we talked about, and here's that UEI number that we talked about earlier. Now remember, you don't have to have this to set up an account right now. It'll still let you go ahead and set one up, but we are going to require that you have it by April 8th. So just make sure that you start working on that and getting that number. Now, we've talked a lot about programs for nonprofits and organizations because that's mostly what we do. But we do have programs for artists, and I wanted to mention those quickly. Like I said before, we have two artist rosters. We have the teaching roster and we have that touring roster. For artists that want to be a part of that, the deadline is December 1st. So if you know of artists that you think would be a great fit for that, be great information to send on to them. And of course, you can find more information on our website. We have the individual artist fellowships, which we also call IAF. Those categories rotate yearly. This year it's for filmmaking and performing arts. And the IAF fellowships are basically there to support artists and the work that they do. So they'll submit samples of what they have done, but it's not tied to a specific project. It's to support artists. And then we have a few different exhibition programs. Now the deadlines all vary. So you'll want to either go to the website, make sure you sign up for our newsletter, that type of thing, so you're getting that information. But we have a gallery in our office called the Fred Simon Gallery, where artists can exhibit. We oversee the governor's residence in Lincoln. And then there are various 1% for art projects that happen. Those vary greatly depending on building projects that are happening. So it's always good to kind of check out the website if that's something that you're interested in. Later on next week, we're going to talk about much more specific grant writing and budget items about actually writing the application, but just a few kind of general tips that I wanted to go over before we take questions. First of all, start early. Don't wait until the night that the application is due. You're going to create a lot of stress for yourself. Usually there are applications that are not as well written, and you don't want to put yourself in the situation where you might have some weird computer glitch and then you can't get things submitted. 11:45 and your computer decides that it needs to restart and reset all of its settings. You don't want that to happen. So don't put yourself in that situation. Write to the reviewer. We talked about a lot of the grant programs get reviewed by outside panelists. And those outside panelists, they aren't going to know you or your community or your project. So make sure that you're not assuming that they know things that they don't. We sometimes even pull in panelists from outside the state. So you really do have to give a very clear picture of your community and what it is that you're doing. Be consistent in your application. So for instance, if you talk about in the program description that you have 3 artists coming in to do this project, but then we go to the budget and the budget only shows 1 artist, there's going to be a lot of questions and it's really going to confuse the panelists and they're not going to understand. Well, are there 3? Is there 1? Are they not paying 2 of them? And you really don't want to have many questions. That's the whole goal, is to make it as clear as possible. So just make sure that application is consistent all the way through. Be sure to proofread your application before you submit it. Even better is if you can have someone else take a look at it and read through it. And not just for grammatical or spelling things, but are you saying what it is you mean to say? Are you really telling your story? I know I am guilty of this sometimes because I know something, I assume someone else is, and so I kind of jump in halfway through the story. And you don't want to do that in a grant application because they're not going to have the backstory. So have someone else take a look at it and see if it comes across clearly. And then last of all, feel free to call or email us with questions. Once an application is submitted, really we are hands off unless there's some sort of technical issue where we have to get a hold of you and say, you know, oh, the file's corrupted, we can't read this, or, you know, something to that effect. But really at that point, we are hands off and we send it on to the reviewers. So if you have questions either about, hey, what grant category do I fit in best? Or what does this question really mean? And what is it that you really want to know? It's really best to ask those way before you submit. I know all of us are more than happy to look through an application before you submit it, and we can do a staff review of it. The idea being, if we have questions about something, probably an outside panelist is going to have questions also, because we've probably already had a discussion with you and at least understand a little bit what's going on. So we can kind of help with that. And we want you to get funded. And so we would much rather help on the front end and answer questions. That is all I had. Be sure you thank your elected officials for their support and their funding.